We have 5 presentations going over some of our ongoing projects, looking at our methodology and ways to improve our estimations. But before we move on to the interesting stuff, I have a few housekeeping messages to provide. We have this information also on the chat for you to look it over. Please raise your hand if you have any questions after each presentation. Also, you can use the chat to pose your questions. We have James Bentley, team lead for the Southern Resource Use Monitoring Group, monitoring the chat. The session is being recorded, but please do not take pictures unless the presenter indicates that it's okay on the slides. And with that, I'm going to introduce the first speaker, Matt Winn. He's a forester with the Southern Research Station. His presentation, he's going to talk about wood procurement allocation tool used in forest inventory to inform potential wood sources and species composition. Take it away.
Thank you, Consuelo. Yeah, so as Consuelo said, my name is Matt Winn. I work for the U.S. Forest Service Southern Research Station Forest Inventory and Analysis Program, in particular the Resource Use section. I'm located in Blacksburg, Virginia, and today I'm going to be talking about a tool that we developed to allocate county procurement from primary wood-using mills. So real quick, I just want to give a background on the National Resource Use Monitoring Program, which we call NRUM. There's 2 components to the program, the timber product output studies and harvest utilization studies. The purpose of these studies is to account for the NFA, National Forest Inventory tree removal estimates. Okay. So basically, we want to know what happens to trees once they're harvested. So once they hit the ground, we want to know, how much of that tree is left in the woods, how much of it is used for product, what products are being made, and then wood movement. So where is that wood being transferred to? My talk is going to focus on the TPO aspect of the program. So the way that we collect our timber product output data is we send out surveys to primary wood-using mills throughout the country. And prior to 2019, this was done periodically. So every few years we would survey 100% mills. But since then, we've moved to an annual sample survey. So now we send out a survey to a sample of mills every year. And we collect various pieces of information from these surveys, but really the key piece of information that we're after is the volume of roundwood that's received by product type, species, and geographic origin. So we want to know how much wood the mill's bringing in, what products they're making, and where is that wood coming from. So one of the things that we collect is the total volume of roundwood being brought into a mill. So in addition to that, we want to know where that wood is coming from. So this is the county draw section of the TPO survey form, the Southern TPO survey form. And this is where we collect that information. So we asked the mill to provide the county and state where that wood is coming from, and then the volume by species of wood coming from that county. This can either be entered in volume amounts or percentage amounts. Each of the regions, they administer their own surveys. So the South, the North, and the West, they each have their own survey and their own survey form. Basically collect the same general information, but the forms do differ a little bit. So this is the county origin form for the northern region, and you can see it's a little different from the South. One of the things that's different, they actually ask for a procurement radius, so how far out mills are procuring wood from the mill. And in addition, whereas the South only differentiates between softwood and hardwood, the North actually asks for a detailed species group. So the problem that we've had is that a lot of mills don't provide this county procurement information. And obviously this is a problem because that's kind of the meat and potatoes of our survey. So we don't really know why they don't fill it out all the time. I speculate maybe they think it takes too much time to gather that information, but I think for a lot of them, they simply don't know, and that's probably the case for a lot of the smaller mills that just don't keep that level of data. So one solution to this problem that we came up with is to model the county procurement using mill and timber resource data. And the advantage of using a model like this is the mill would only have to supply the species that they're bringing in as well as their procurement radius. So we developed a county procurement estimation tool that runs in Microsoft Excel. What it does is it estimates the percentage of roundwood volume that they bring in by county and species group. And the input parameters are procurement radius and FIA inventory data. And specifically, it's merchantable timber volume within a county. So if you look at the bottom, it kind of shows how the tool works. So based on the provided procurement radius, it will pick all of the counties that fall within that procurement radius. It uses county centroids. So if the weighted center of that county falls within the procurement radius, it selects that county. After that, for all the counties that were selected, it pulls in the total merchantable timber volume by species for that county. And then it adds in a skew factor, which I'll talk about a little more on the next slide, but it's kind of a way to skew the data, skew the estimates toward counties that are closer to the mill. It's kind of based on the assumption that mills aren't bringing in the same amount of wood from far away as they are closer to the mill. So when you combine all these three factors, and it produces an estimate of procurement. So as I mentioned before, what the skew factor does is it kind of gives preference to counties that are closer to the mill. So the factor, it's a percent value that ranges from 0 to 100. You can kind of think of it as the likelihood that a mill will bring in logs from the maximum distance, so whatever their procurement radius is. So if you look at the graph, so a skew factor of 100 basically means that they're just as likely to get logs from the maximum distance as they are from the counties closest to the mill. So if you look at the graph, it kind of gives you each set of bars represents the estimated procurement for a particular county, and then on the x-axis it shows the distance of that county from the mill. So you can see the red bar, which is skew factor of 100. You can see how the trend line is kind of flat because basically it's saying that they're just as likely to get logs from 40 miles away as they are from 1 mile away. But if you change the skew factor to 0, then you can see how it skews the procurement closer to counties closer to the mill. So there's a couple data spreadsheets within the program. There's a volume spreadsheet. So there's a row for every county in the U.S. and within that row, there's the total merchantable timber for that county in 1,000 cubic feet, the species group, by species group, the GPS coordinates for the county centroids, and then there's a column for the calculated distance from the mill to the county centroid. So once you input the coordinates of the mill, it automatically calculates this column, and it provides a distance from the mill to every county in the U.S. And then the second spreadsheet, it's a mill spreadsheet. So this is for every mill that's in our TPO database. It lists the county where the mill resides, the mill number, which is a number we assign to the mill. It's unique within every state. Mill type, species processed, and then the coordinates. So I'll show you on the next slide how this mill spreadsheet is incorporated. So this is what the input portion of the tool looks like. So first thing that it asks for is the GPS coordinates, and we have two ways of entering that. You can enter them directly using the mill lat, mill long, or you can enter the mill. If you're looking up a particular mill, you can enter the state code and the mill number, and it will automatically pull in the coordinates from the mill spreadsheet. The next thing it asks for is the procurement radius, which is something hopefully the mill can provide for us, and it's the maximum distance in miles that a mill procures roundwood. And then the next thing is an option we added. We found that not all mills procure from other states other than their own. So for whatever reasons, tax purposes or whatever, they may limit their procurement to within the state. So this was just an easy option to add. It's just a yes no box. And so if you want to limit the procurement to the state where the mill resides, you can say yes. And then the last one is the skew factor. We still don't quite have a handle on what should be used here. So I typically just used a value of 50. It's kind of right in the middle. So it skews it a little bit, but it's not a maximum. So it's going to require more testing to kind of figure out, based on mill size and products and things like that, what we should be using for a skew factor. Then the last portion, that's where you select your species. So again, for the South, we just use undifferentiated softwood and undifferentiated hardwood. So these are the only two check boxes we will use in the South. But for the North, they have the option of selecting individual species groups. Or you can select all hardwood species, all softwood species, or all species. So before I give an example, I want to preface this by saying we never give out individual mill information because of our confidentiality agreement. So with that said, this is not a real mill. This is a mill that I made up. So let's pretend we have a mill in northern Georgia that processes both softwood and hardwood. They give us a 30-mile procurement radius, and they procure logs from outside of their own state. So you can kind of see what the input data would look like over here. We've got both undifferentiated softwood and undifferentiated hardwood selected. So when we click the calculate button up here, this is what the output looks like. So some mills will tell us, like if they run multiple species, they will tell us, give us a breakdown between those species, like 50% hardwood, 50% softwood. But if they don't provide that, then we can estimate it using this tool based on the available merchantable timber in the county. So in this case, it's estimating that the mill is running about 29% softwood and 71% hardwood. So over here, it shows the county and the state and the county for procurement, the distance of that county from the mill. Then it gives the estimated procurement for each species. So in this case, it's estimating that 11% of softwood is coming from Fannin, Georgia, and 17% of hardwood. The bottom, this is not part of the program. I just threw this in here to kind of help you visualize what's going on. So this is kind of what it looks like for softwood and for hardwood. So let's look at another example for the North, since they're a little bit different. Again, this is a made-up mill. So let's say there's a mill in southwestern Pennsylvania that processes mixed hardwoods with a 40-mile procurement radius, and they go outside of their state for procurement. So the top part will look very similar. Since they didn't tell us individual species, I use the all hardwood species checkbox. And when you click on that, it automatically selects all of the hardwood species.
1 minute.
So you click.
1 minute.
Okay. When you click on the calculate button, this is what the results look like. So it's very similar to the South, just a little more detailed by species. One thing I'll mention is over here, I think there's 20 or 21 hardwood species selected in the previous slide. Here, there's probably 17 or 16, something like that. So if the species percentage falls below 1%, it will actually drop that species. But other than that, the results are the same, just a little more detailed. So what's next? A lot of testing. So this is by no means a final model. This is just a starting point for us. Gives us something to start with and improve upon. So the good thing is we have known county procurement data from previous years that we can use to test this model and look for ways to make improvements. And the other thing, like I mentioned before, is we really don't have a handle on the skew factor, what that should be. So we need to do some testing to determine, based on things like mill type, size, and species, what the ideal skew factor should be.
Perfect. Thank you,
And
Matt. I have to, so sorry I have to cut you off, but
no,
we're
I'm
at the
done.
time, we're at the limit. All right, perfect. And if you have any questions, please post them to the chat and we'll go through those and put you in touch with the presenter if needed. So we move on to the next presentation. First of all, we're going to move to the next presentation. We have Logan Abbey. He's a research fellow with the University of Massachusetts for Family Forest Research Center. Matt Todd is actually, I'm going to turn this off because my internet is a bit spotty today. Matt's talk is about testing the accuracy of the county allocation tool, so very, very well timed. And his presentation title is Verifying Wood Draw Estimation Accuracy. Thanks.
All right, great. So I am Logan Abbey. I'm a research fellow at the Family Forest Research Center at the University of Massachusetts. Most of my work happens in the harvest utilization studies that Matt mentioned during his presentation. But today in particular, I am going to be talking about verifying the accuracy of wood draw estimations within the Timber Products Output Survey. So at the Family Forest Research Center, we help with the administration implementation of the TPO survey in the Northern Research Station. Like Matt said, the survey form looks a little bit different between the research stations, but the information that it captures is very similar. Of course, we're asking about the volume, species variety, and county origin of the roundwood that's received by respondent mills, the equipment they're using, the products they're making, and how they're disposing or using their residues. The equipment, the production, the disposal of residues, even the volume and the species mix are things that are usually pretty readily able to tell us. But as we know, the tough nut to crack and something we kind of spend a lot of time chasing around is the question of where are these sawmills getting their wood from? Here we can see, like Matt showed you, a little snippet of the Northern Research Forum's section 2.5. That's the origin of roundwood received. We call it the species county matrix. Here's an example of what we would like to get back, where they've broken down the proportion of each species that came from the various counties they procured wood from. You can see I've got circled on the left their procurement radius, where they can write in the mean or average procurement radius for the roundwood that they're receiving. We do see a lot of non-response for section 2.5. Mill owners and operators or procurement forester or whoever might fill out the survey for us. A lot of times we hear that they aren't keeping records about this kind of information, or maybe they are, but they can't take the time out of their day to chase it down for us. A lot of people are confused by the question itself. The kind of big species county matrix is daunting to them. They don't fill it out correctly or completely. And there's also a flat out refusal. Survey fatigue is a real thing. In the smaller states where there's not a whole ton of sawmills, they get a complete tally every year. So there's plenty of mills that are tired of responding year after year. And or maybe by the time they get to section 2.5, they are feeling done with the survey and skip the question. So in dealing with this non-response, especially for section 2.5, our kind of method up to this point to fill in those gaps in our data set has been to bring forward historical data. If the mill has responded in the past and they've completed section 2.5 correctly, we'll bring that data forward. But if the historical data isn't there or it's not complete, we're now using the county draw estimator tool to fill in those gaps in our data. So I'm not going to go into too much depth about this because Matt did such a great job explaining it, obviously. But it basically generates estimates on county origin for each species received by the mill. We do ask for specific species information, so this generates that matrix for us. Here's a little imaginary mill existing at the location of UMass Amherst that's doing mainly hardwoods and some hemlock. You can see we've got the skew factor of 50 in there. And this mill has an imaginary procurement radius of 30 miles. So we've been wondering how reliable is this for usage in the north when we're implementing this survey. What we were wondering is how reliable is this estimation tool, and could it even be preferable to bring forward old data? So we're going to look at some of the kind of differences in these two methods for filling gaps in our survey data. So what we did, we were able to gather 38 complete surveys from across the New England states that had completely and correctly filled out Section 2.5 in survey year 2022, which of course is production year 2021. This is the most recent data that we had access to. We had the edited survey forms in PDF that we were able to extract data from. We were also able to gather historical survey data for those same mills. And then what I did is use the county draw estimator tool to impute the species county matrix for those mills using the procurement radius and species that we knew that they dealt with. So I did a little bit of data wrangling. I extracted the data from all of the PDFs and converted them all from their respective units of measure into 1,000 cubic feet. In the north, we are mainly hearing mills report in international quarter inch, but we did have a couple of Doyles and Scribners worm their way in. So once I had everything in 1,000 cubic feet, I moved the data into RStudio, where I was able to pivot all three data sets. So that is the reported, the historical, and the imputed data sets to a long format that allowed me to create a matrix that contained the volume values for all three data sets. And then I ran the mean absolute error for the imputed and historical data against the reported data. So this is the matrix that I wound up with. You can see each mill has a unique ID number. Every county that appears in the data set has a unique 5-digit code. And then we've got a reported, imputed, and historical volume for each mill, county, species observation. Here's a little sneak peek at my R code. It's nothing too heady. I'm actually quite a novice when it comes to R and statistics and things like that. But you can see what I'm doing here is just joining the data frames together, calculating the absolute error for the historic and imputed data, and then taking the mean of that. And what did we find? Well, the error between them wasn't hugely different. So the error between the reported data and the historical data was 64 and a little bit of change. And between the reported data and imputed data, we got 67 and a little bit of change. So they're not exactly the same. The historical data for these 38 mills was a little bit closer to reality than the imputed data, but I think we're still in the ballpark. We saw a lower measure of error in the historic data, and they both did have, a measure of error, but there were, some extreme outliers in this data. We had mills that were doing millions of cubic feet all the way to a guy that did 8 logs that came from his neighborhood. So we feel pretty good about this. I think that if we were to expand the kind of sample that we ran the analysis on, we'd see those two numbers creep together. Back to the actual measures of error, I was hoping to also report in percent, but I ran into divide by zero issues that forced me to filter out a lot of observations that really kind of biased the results. So we've just got mean absolute error for these, but we see them in relatively close to one another. So some of the things that's kind of maybe important to think about when you're looking at these results is that the reported data was from the survey year 2022, which means it was all roundwood information for 2021. My understanding is that the county draw estimator tool uses up-to-date FIA volume data, and the imputations were done in 2024. So if we had done them in 2021 or 2022, we might see that gap, creep closer a little bit. And something also to consider is that, a radius is not always indicative of the distance traveled. A lot of times, my impression is that when the mills are reporting their procurement radius to us, they're really thinking about drive distance, a drive time. So a 30-mile radius around a mill is, might include counties that are not realistically within a 30-mile trucking distance. And finally, the county draw estimator tool, it uses the reported procurement radius as a maximum distance, but the NRS survey form actually asks mills to report the average procurement distance and not how far are you willing to go. And so a lot of times I think mill owners probably do have a maximum distance in mind, and they're probably giving us something like the halfway point. So that's something to keep in mind as well. And finally, I don't know if anybody had read the original abstract that I submitted for this project, but originally I was going to try to ground truth the TPO imputations by making a comparison of dasymmetric maps. In the state of Massachusetts, the Forest Cutting Practices Act requires that a cutting plan is approved for commercial timber harvests within the state, and these cutting plans actually quantify in detail volume removed for each species for every single harvest. And our Department of Conservation and Recreation maintains a database of that information. So my hope was to create a data-symmetric map using the DCR's data and one for the TPO data as well to try and ground truth the information captured and imputed by the TPO survey. We weren't able to get that data in time, so I did this examination instead. But we haven't completely let go of that idea. Here is a data-symmetric map that I made using the 2019 TPO data of the state of Massachusetts. And I guess I will take this opportunity to perhaps solicit if anybody lives in or knows of a state where timber harvest removal data exists and is accessible. I would be happy to hear from you. So my contact information is there. If anybody has any questions, you can feel free to reach out by email or ask now. I'll answer to the best of my ability. And yeah, that is what I've got for you guys.
Fantastic. Thank you, Logan. Question for Logan?
Hey, Logan. I thought that was great. A question about the map, which I really love. Why are there holes in there? Are there certain towns that don't report, or is there something else funky going on there?
Basically, the map that I made, it excludes areas that are protected in perpetuity by something like a conservation easement, and it also takes out non-forested areas. So the map that I made that I showed you was actually exclusively showing forested parcels of 10 acres or larger, which is where I figured timber harvesting was most likely to occur.
Excellent. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you, Logan, again. We're going to move on now to our next presenter, Rapeepan Kantavichai. She is a research forester with the Southern Research Station National Resource Use Monitoring Group. And the title of her presentation is Using Historical Mill County Procurement Information to Improve County Sawlog Removals.
Hi, good morning, everyone. I'm Rapeepan Kantavichai. In National Resource Use Monitoring Group, as well as Consuelo, Brandeis, Matt Winn, and Jim Gray. This presentation, we will report our findings in using historical mill county procurement information to improve county sawlog removal estimates. First, just give you a little bit about background about the Timber Products Output Survey, or TPO. TPO is a component in the National Resource Use Monitoring Program Forest Service. Since 1948, the goal of TPO is to estimate the amount of rootwood removed by product, species groups, and source location. We also estimate the amount of rootwood movement in cross-regional scale. The frequency of these surveys vary by region and facility. Surveys for all timber products other than pulpwood will conduct every 3 to 5 years in the north and 4 to 7 years in the west, and every other year in the south. From 2019 forward, TPO transition from full canvas to an annual program to sample mills. Well, the motivation for the change is to improve the national consistency and temporal scale of TPO estimates for effective land use planning and market analysis. Mills were surveyed annually with stratified random sampling design for each state and rootwood product. The detail is in general technical report. Basically, for each state and rootwood product, the sample size will be at least 40% of active mills. 3 parameters that use in stratification are state rootwood product and measure of size, or MOS, which is mills non-receipt. If we have enough population, we sample all mills where MOS greater than 10 million cubic feet, and for the rest, we stratify into the strata and randomly sample 2 mills from each stratum. But when the stratum contains 2 mills or less, we enumerate or. So the problem, the current annual sample design gives reliable estimates at the state level. However, the error in county estimates are high, especially in the counties with few mills or where a small portion of rawood is drawn. This is because of the estimate volume get assigned to the procurement county of selected sample mills only. There is a illustration here. Suppose a state with 10 sawmill, 10 sawmills as shown in a figure with a measure of size in 1,000 cubic feet. We sample 40% of population. Mills were stratified into blue and orange stratum, and 2 mills per stratum are selected into the sample. So for the blue stratum, in the previous slide, these 3 mills, 1, 2, 3, were procure rawood from their supplying counties. Suppose mill 1 and mill 2 were randomly selected into the sample. TPO got volume and county information from the selected mill's volume, then multiplied it by the expansion factors, resulting in overestimation in the county associated with the selected sample mills and underestimated in the county supplying to non-selected mills. County draw for all mills in the state. For the selected mills, were circled. So for the blue stratum, these 2, and for the red stratum are these 2 mills. We can see that county procuring for single mill, it will be underestimated if they didn't get selected, and it will be overestimated if they get selected. And then the county procuring more than 2 strata can be less biased, as they can balance out from the selected mill and non-selected mill, but they also can be worse if both of them get selected or both of them didn't get selected. Then we explore the proposed historical mill county procurement approach for the mill that is not selected into the sample. We use the most recent data that we get. And then we also get first we get assign the mill to the average, assign the volume to the mill by using the average of the stratum, the stratum volume, which is the average of 2 selected mills. So this is like 900. And then we assign the proportion using the historical information. This is the percentage. So in the 2000, so this is 2013. So suppose we want to calculate for 2013, we use a 2011 data that we know. So we assign the proportion, which is like 30%, 50%, and 20% here. We also explore another approach that also reduce the bias, which is the radius procurement approach. This is a simplified version of procurement model that used in the imputation. So we assign the procurement area and procurement distance to 25 miles radius from mill to counties and Troy. And we suppose we assign the same proportion for each county that in the radius. Because for 2013 we found that average procurement distance is around 20 miles. This is the way to calculate the average procurement distance. So this approach is a baseline measurement of the county volume estimates improvement when we incorporate new location data. So this is a illustration here. So 25 miles from mill 3 would include 2 out of 3 supplying counties, but also include 2 additional non-supplying counties with the stratum volume, and we allocated to the circle counties equally. So, and then we did the Monte Carlo analysis. We test these approaches using Monte Carlo analysis in sawmills in 11 states across the southern US. And we used 2013 TPO data as a true observation. And we use 2011 data as a MOS, measure of size for stratification. So there are 771 mills procuring from 948 counties. In one sampling simulation, 3 approaches were applied and county volume estimates were recorded and compared with the actual volume. And the IMSE were derived. So results show that from the average county volume at 2,300 MCF, which is 1,000 cubic feet, the TPO median IMSE is around 371, while the historical mill county procurement method reduced IMSE by half, and radius procurement method reduced IMSE around like 30%. And this is a map of the IMSE in each counties. So we can see that the radius procurement method improved in high IMSE counties, like the yellow one. So it's help improve that. Then we also test a sensitivity analysis. So we use a longer temporal scale by using 2011 mill receipt as a historical procurement data, which is like a percentage for 2015 and 2017 county railroad estimates. And also we test with a weaker MOS correlation by using a log transformation. Then we also use a finer scales in a sampling frame. Instead of using the state, we use a FIA unit instead. Okay, and then the result. So we can see the historical approach. So this is in IMSE increased percentage. We can see that historical approach is more volatile, means it increased more compared with TPO and radius procurement. This is compared with the original IMSE of that method. And for the correlation change, the weaker correlation, this historical mill county approach is better than another two. Okay, and then for when you use a FIA survey unit, because using the FIA unit sampling frame will reduce the homogeneity in mill stratum. So the stratum are like the MCF in one stratum are different. So in that case, the IMSE in prediction will increase, and historical mill county increase more. So it's kind of sensitive more to the reduction in stratum homogeneity. And then, so we also did some mill procurement dynamic. The historical procurement data has been implicitly addressed, but as being less effective in high temporal variation in procurement patterns. So we examined the dynamic of annual mill county procurement using the mill radius boundary, which is the maximum distance from mills to procuring county polygon, or somehow woodshed analysis. Then in summary, we found that the shift in mill radius boundaries can be a random walk process or mean reverting, implying the most recent procurement data is the best predictor for the future procurement. So, so we can use the most recent one. So for the conclusion and future research, historical mill county procurement and radius procurement approach can be promising to reduce county volume estimates error, and the improvement in radius procurement model could be further investigate, because this is just a baseline, and further analysis is needed, including other years, states, or across all FIA region or raw wood product, and by species group volume. So if you have any question, please contact me or Consuelo. We also plan to submit this finding in the special issue in Forest Ecology Management, issue Advancing Forest Inventory Science for Enhancing Science into Tomorrow Forest. Yeah, and that's about it from my presentation. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Rapeepan. We're up to the to the time, and we're going to move to the next presentation. Thank you so much. The next presentation, we're changing gears a little bit. We're moving to Glenn Christensen. He's with the Pacific Northwest, and John Shaw with Rocky Mountain. They're presenting their work on reconciling mill survey and plot-based estimates of timber removals in the Western states.
All right. Well, thank you so much. And thank you, Rapeepan, for that great presentation. I think that's a good lead into what I'm be talking about, kind of looking more at removals. And for what I'm doing is, and by the way, as Consuelo mentioned, I'm Glenn Christensen, work as an inventory analyst at a P&W station in Portland. And this is work that I've done with Olaf Kugler and also John Shaw at Rocky Mountain. And what we want to do is look at removals and comparing them to the way that we've been doing it out here in the West, the Western FIA units, comparing them to what we get from the inventory. So what I'll be talking about. So, okay. Excellent. Okay, cool. So basically, historically, in the two Western FIA units, P&W and Rocky Mountain, we've relied on harvest estimates that have been compiled by the University of Montana's Bureau of Business and Economic Research, BBER, which I'll probably just refer to as BEBR for the rest of this presentation, so I don't have to say that out every time. So that's what we've been relying on through time. And as Rapeepan mentioned, the Eastern units have been able to use estimates removals from the inventory and using the TPO surveys as well. And the Western units are now working on our third cycle of plot remeasurements. So now we have enough information so we can really start to look at, because we have historically had removal estimates, or better known as harvest, collected by University of Montana, or BEBR, we can now compare those estimates to what we're getting from the plot-based measurements from the inventory. And yeah, like I said, what I want now, compare these between these two. So it's a cool opportunity to do that. And that's what I'll be presenting today. So we did a couple things that I'll be looking at. One was some work that John Shaw has done at Rocky Mountain, basically doing a direct comparison of the surveys from the University of Montana survey. So I want to make sure to start a timer here to the plot-based removals. And then I'll also be going through and looking a little bit about work we've done at P&W, where we used the surveys and the plot-based estimates to complete some analysis of carbon we've been doing out in the Western states. And what we basically do is use the inventory to the plot-based estimates from the inventory to estimate standing tree carbon. And then we use removals from both the plot-based removals and BEBR's removals to talk about carbon in harvested trees. And then we, using the work that's been compiled from the surveys by University of Montana, we look at carbon into harvested wood products. So we go from the whole thing, from the standing tree all the way to the final product. And just go a little bit more into how the University of Montana estimates your annual timber harvest. And on the right side of the screen is a snapshot of their great website. They have some really fantastic information. If you haven't explored that and you need information, that's always a great resource. But they we've been doing it through funding agreements through the Rocky Mountain and P&W stations to do this work. And they do surveys. They do both annual sample-based surveys and then the periodic census surveys of all the primary facilities in the state to come up with overall estimates of removals and also how the wood is being used. So for the states that have it available, tax records available, the way they come up with annual harvest estimates is basically through tax surveys, or sorry, not tax surveys, but tax records. That's done by ownerships, public and private ownerships. They also reach out to state departments of forestry and revenue. They data requests to the BLM, data requests to the National Forest Systems, and then this information is then summarized that goes into the national TPO system, looking at removals by state and ownership. And then for the states that don't have that kind of level of information, they do this. They use this the mill survey work to estimate how much removals. Basically, the kind of stuff that Rapeepan was showing. Look, the mill survey work to come up with removal estimates. And like I said, this is used for full census and sample surveys. So, so then how do we, for the inventory side of things, just a quick recap, some of this stuff has been talked about in previous presentations, but the way we come up with removal estimates from the inventory side of things is we look at basically using the established methodology, looking at live tree growth rules and mortality, known as GRM. It's all calculated from the remeasured plots and trees on the plots. The field crews go and account for the harvested trees. As they go back and remeasure these plots, they account for any trees that have been harvested, record information about the type of treatment and if the tree was actually removed or not. So when we say removed, I was add a quick note in here, which I think is an important note. And that means that the tree was removed from the plot. That does not necessarily mean the tree was actually removed from the forest and utilized. All we know is the tree is no longer on the plot. Get this pointer out of the way. The other thing is we use a 10-year measurement cycle for most plots in the Western states. When I say most, I say that because we're now moving to a 5-year cycle for plot remeasurements in California, which we're still in process of implementing, but we are fully making that happen in California. So the annual rate of timber harvest volume is estimated as the average annual rate of change over that 10-year measurement period. And the details for these different components of change are all found in our great Bechtold and Patterson, basically GTR SRS 80, better known as the Green Book. That's where all the details of how these removals are calculated are found. So looking at the estimates, one of the things that we'll first look at what we came up with and look at what John Shaw came up with for some of the Rocky Mountain states. So this was the first one I looked at, and this is looking at Idaho and Montana. The blue lines on the bottom are Montana. Dotted line is the survey-based estimates, and then the solid blue line is from the plot-based estimates, and then above is Idaho. The dotted line shows a pattern through time, and then the solid line in green is showing from the forest inventory estimates. And the cool thing about this is it tracks pretty well. The trend is tracking, so it looks pretty good. They're a little above, which isn't that surprising because the inventory is looking at everything that's been removed from the plot, where the mill surveys or the work that done by University of Montana is accounting for wood that was received by harvested, the trees that's been harvested. So there is going to be a slight difference just because of tops and limbs and all that kind of stuff. But anyway, they track pretty well. And then the other slide here is looking at some of the plots in the Rocky Mountain states, and these are ones where you don't have the the tax-based estimates of removals available. This is using the mill survey estimates of removals and this help you understand. I'll kind of walk through it real quick. So the green lines on the bottom here, this is for Utah. So the squares here are from the University of Montana's census surveys. And then the green line along the bottom is from the plot-based estimates of removals. And you can see that tracks pretty well. And then for the purple, that is New Mexico, the two different census surveys, and then the plot-based estimates. And then you have the blue lines, which was that Arizona. And then the one above is Colorado. So the one that's really stands out, of course, is this one here, and it's kind of going a different direction from that. And the point that John really makes clear in this when we went through this is the Colorado report is not done. That's still in process. So we're not really exactly sure what's going on with that, or maybe it's this, but the point is this one is incomplete. These are preliminary results, but that's for other states, it looks like it's tracking pretty well so far. And then the other slide, and this is one that's really interesting. This is looking at by species in specifically Utah. So the way to understand this figure is, so these columns here to the left side, so look, the red, the skinny red columns here kind of divides between the plot-based estimates versus the University of Montana's survey-based estimates. So on the left side of this one for spruce, this is all from the forest inventory, and over here, these two bars on the right side of this, of the red column, are from the University of Montana. And you can see here, they come up with a pretty high level of removals of spruce, and this is Engelmann spruce, by the way. And then they also have pretty high estimates of removals from the TPO surveys as well. Interesting thing, and then basically it's similar for lodgepole pine as a similar thing. Pretty high levels of removals from the forest survey, and then also from the TPO surveys. But like ponderosa pine and Douglas fir, we have fairly low estimates of removals from the inventory plots, but pretty high from the TPO surveys, which is really interesting. And then aspen, I don't know what the heck's gone on aspen, because it's like the forest surveys hit. I don't know if it's like, they hit a spot where they just happen to be harvesting, and it could be a factor of just a small sample size. And they hit a plot that they had recently harvested, because these are much higher than we're seeing from the TPO survey. But the other one that's really interesting is the true fir. In this one, where we have pretty high levels of removals from the forest inventory, but not so much from the TPO-based estimates, or from the University of Montana estimates. And the thing here is, John's thinking most of this is probably subalpine fir, which is something that's harvested and probably decked, but not necessarily removed for wood products. So a lot of this is probably used for firewood. But it's an interesting story here, where we're showing some pretty high levels of removals from the forest, from the inventory, but not so much in the TPO surveys. So moving on, just keep on with your time. Looking at the P&W analysis. So this is where, as I mentioned, we're looking at using we want to do kind of a larger state level estimate for some of our carbon analysis. We want to basically account for wood from the standing trees into the different carbon pools. And we basically, how do these align? So we did a two-step approach, a weighted average, and then we basically aligned our removals to see how well it lined up from the forest inventory. I'm moving along so I don't run out of time. One thing I want to make real quick, and this has been shown earlier, but this is how the panels line up. And this is that Margaret Evans referred to as the latency effect, where you don't have as much overlap from the panels, but most of the overlap here is in the middle for the this is how we calculated the weighting. And then the weighting came out like this, and came out pretty good. For a California, FIA estimate was 1.4, sorry, basically 1.5 billion Scribner. And then our weighted average came out just over 1.5 billion board feet of Scribner. Oregon too is within the 95% confidence interval. We didn't do so good for Washington though. It just came out a little low on that one. But other than that, it aligned pretty well. So we're pretty pleased with that. And really, the next step is to dig more into the ownership and species stuff, like we've shown with Utah, which is really interesting. We want to use a new tree level utilized code to better account for the harvested trees. And we also look at salvage. Like one of the things I think is really interesting, and the report is coming out for California, 38% of their harvest in 21 was salvaged dead trees. That's the most ever reported since they've been doing this. They've been looking at this since 2000. Previously, the high was only 13%. So that's one of the things we want to be sure to capture in our surveys or in our estimates from the inventory. And thank you. More information. There's some spots to go to, and please contact me or John if you have any questions. Thanks.
All right. Well, thank you, Glenn. Very
Yeah.
nice presentation. I do have some questions, but unfortunately, we don't have time. So
Yeah.
I'll follow up with you later.
Sounds good. All right.
Yeah,
Thanks.
thank you. So we're going to move to our last presentation for this session. And this one is really changing gears. We're not going to look at our survey forms and some plans to look into improving those. So our next presenter is Chris Fisher, the TPO coordinator with the University of Massachusetts Family Forest Research Center. And Chris will be presenting about the TPO instrument and response testing.
So here we go. So how's everybody doing today? I'm the last presenter, so hopefully you're all still with me.
We're with you. We're with you.
All right, perfect. Now, a little bit of the start of my presentation, we've sort of gone over. The TPO is a survey, and we've talked kind of at length about a lot of the things in the survey and tools we use. My presentation is more about the instrument itself. So it's more about the questions we're asking and how we're asking them and ways that we might improve that in the future. So I want to first introduce my team. So I work out of the Family Forest Research Center at the University of Massachusetts. We're partners with the Forest Service, Northern Research Station directly, Southern Research Station as well. And my team has really pulled a lot of weight on this study. Logan, who presented earlier, he's also part of the team. So shout out to Abbey, Jake, Rose, and Logan up in Massachusetts. Just overview, we've spoken about it. We are all part of the National Resource Use Monitoring Program, and TPO is both a survey and a utilization study, and this is going to be about the survey. So one thing to note, which again has been said, but maybe not quite so overtly, TPO is collected, the data is collected in 3 separate regions. There's the northern, the southern, and the western. So we are responsible in Massachusetts for implementation of the northern version of the survey. So we have a unique instrument, and we do ask some unique questions. So the instrument itself, the TPO survey form. Our form has 8 pages, 5 sections, and each section is separate. The first section is statistics about the mill, the address, the type, the status, is it open, closed, what the output capacity of the mill is. Then we ask about volume, species, county of origin, and we've heard about this in a few different presentations today, and we're going to circle back to it in mine as well. Then we ask about some products and equipment, as well as what the residues are that are generated. And lastly, we ask them if they want to be in the directory or not in the directory. So that volume, species, county section of the TPO instrument that we implement, we call it the county matrix, and it does have some challenges. So the species county matrix, it requires some detailed record keeping, and we've heard in a presentation already today, there's a lot of issue getting this information from mills. And so there's speculation, we wonder, are they not keeping these records? Are the records difficult to find? What are some reasons? But what we do know is that it does require some detailed record keeping, that it can be a bit of a burden to calculate these numbers, and it can be downright confusing for some people. We're asking for 2 different metrics in the same grid, right? You need to know not only the species, but you need to know the percent of that species by county of procurement. So getting those 2 pieces of information together on the same data entry point can be sort of confusing for some folks. So non-response. Non-response was thrown around a little bit. Non-response is basically when you send a survey out, for any reason someone can't answer your question, then you don't get a response. And so non-response is bad for a survey. Non-response means that you're not getting the information that you need. And so some common causes of that might be the survey is taking too long, people are busy, politics, we are the government after all. So there's lots of reasons. They might be in a bad mood, who knows? But most of those reasons we can't really control. We send out the survey and we hope that they'll cooperate, but a few of them we can't. So if we're asking questions that in general there aren't good answers to, we can control that. And if our form is asking those questions in a confusing way, we have control over that as well. So this study was to sort of look at the question we're asking, figure out the information we really need, and is there a different, better, more streamlined, another way to ask that question. So non-response for us, and we've heard a lot about this is going to go quick, but non-response for us is an issue because what do we do when we don't get the answers? We have to impute. And we have some wonderful tools. Matt's tool is key. And we've seen some presentations on those tools and how we're always trying to improve them today. So ways we impute, we've been on Google just to find lat long. So implementing these surveys, we use any tool at our disposal to fill in the blanks and get these surveys filled out. But at the end of the day, it's one thing to finalize a survey that is not quite complete. It's another when you have no response at all and you have to fill in all the data, right? And so imputed data is just not as reliable as a response. We would really much rather have a good question and get a good answer. So briefly, and we've already presented on this as well, the sample that we pull for TPO, it samples large mills with certainty. And so that's kind of important for this presentation. It doesn't matter, like basically if you're in a state that has 25 mills or less, all of your mills will be sampled with certainty. If you have more than that, we create some strata, and the strata are different and variable. We're in the process of pulling the sample for 2024 implementation now, and I'm just learning how complicated that process can be. But suffice to say, when we stratify by volume in each state, the largest strata, those big mills, those are still going to be sampled with certainty. We're always going to be asking them. Now, why is that important? Because the largest mills are the biggest users of round wood. And so that's good for us. That means that the largest mills should reply because they have more staff, they have more ability, they have better records, they have better ways of getting that information, right? So, we were asking ourselves, should we assume that they're going to have a better response than smaller mills? So to figure that out, we did a quick response analysis, and we did it on the most recent implementation year, so 2023. And we created strata within that sample. So we called a large mill anything that did 3,000 cubic feet per year or more. And then we got some results. So when we looked at it, we found that, sorry, I clicked out. So 33% of all mills responded. And that's a pretty good number for a survey of this size. But 49% of the large mills responded, much higher. And only 25% of the small mills responded. So what we wanted to ask is, does this TPO survey species county matrix hurt response rates by putting an undue burden? Is that question just too hard to ask? So the way we were going to try to figure this out is there's another form. There's another TPO survey that's been approved that we were allowed to send out. We called it the Northern Short Form. And what the short form does is it takes that county matrix and splits it out. So now people can report to us the species by percent and the counties by percent, but not necessarily in the same matrix. So we were thinking that might have a lower burden, less detailed records required. And what we did to test that, these are the two next to each other. So on the left is the current TPO species county matrix, and on the right is the new short form that we will be pre-testing. So we developed a pre-testing method. And what we did is we used those same strata, And we didn't want to send this survey to people who had just taken a TPO survey in 2023. So we eliminated that sample from the population, stratified the rest of the population by region, as well as size. And we pulled a sample of 60 records. We were trying to get at least 10 cognitive interviews so that we could just ask some folks about these questions, and we would assess the burden that it put on them to find these records and get us our answers. Pulled some R code, got our sample. We emailed the mills and we asked them to schedule a interview with us. We did not offer any incentives. We weren't paying them to do this. They just had to volunteer to do it out of the goodness of their hearts. And then we were not allowed during these interviews, while we were having them run through the short form, we were not going to give them qualifying answers. If they said, how's that? Is this what you're asking for? Is that, will this answer your question? We said, well, what does that question mean to you? Do you think that so we were trying hard not to put any, give any clarification, just what would we get from you if we weren't here listening to you answer the question? So they would read the question aloud, they would answer the question, and then they would move on to the next one. And we weren't really interested in the answer to the question, just how difficult we perceived it was for them to answer it. So we had a little Likert scale that we developed that we would actually assign. There was an interviewer as well as an observer / note taker, and each of the interviews was recorded so that we could go back and sort of look through and reassess and discuss what sort of burden that put the interviewee under. So the analysis, what did we get from this? Well, we got 7 successful interviews. We didn't quite hit our 10. 4 small, 1 medium, 2 large. Study is ongoing. So we're not done here, but we do have some results that are worth looking at. So if you take every question in the short form and you look at the perceived level of burden for the question, this makes a lot of sense. What is the location of the mill at the bottom? Well, nobody thought that was a burden. Everybody knew where they were. But what is interesting, what county, state, or country did the roundwood originate? Heavy burden. A lot of people found that to be difficult to answer. So it wasn't so much the species, but it was the county. So the matrix itself may not be the hard part. It may just be that origin. So we also broke it down by size of mill, and we found that with the small mills, they did all find it to be a burdensome question, some more than others. So they all found it to be burdensome, and we assume that's because the records are just not kept that way. That was the response. That's what we kept hearing. I don't really know. I don't keep those records. This is what I think. It was anecdotal. Large, this was interesting. So they all found it to be a burden, more of a burden than the small mills. And what I wasn't expecting, I don't think the team was expecting to hear, was that the large mills found it to be a heavy burden because there's so many counties. They have all the records. So now they're going to have to take time away and go in and actually get all of that information and report, 100 counties to us. So the conclusions, basically we go back and we ask the question, does it represent a problem to non-response? It's to be determined. We want to do some more interviews, but it looks like yes, but maybe for different reasons than we thought. So it depends on the mill size, right? So for large mills, they're actually impacted seemingly more so than the small guy. Maybe the small mill doesn't mind just thinking about a couple counties and writing them down, whereas a large mill sees that as a big investment of time. And so it may not be the matrix question itself, but it may just be the county origin question that's causing those issues. So next step, we're just going to continue. We're going to do some more cognitive interviewing. We drew another sample already, and we're going to be reaching out to another set of mills, try to get some more data. And one thing that is interesting is for our next sampling for 2024, to try and combat the non-response, we're going to send out electronically. So we usually mail twice before we start reaching out to mills via email or phone call. And we're going to try emails first and see if we can get a better initial response. So that's my presentation. Thank you very much.
Fantastic. Thank you, Chris. Very interesting results, actually. I had not thought about that of large mills having problems because they do have a wider procurement area, so they will have more counties to account for. So very interesting. Anyway, we have a couple minutes to open it for questions from the audience. If no one is asking any questions, I have one more. Actually, I do have a question. So in the with the survey, when you're reaching out to males asking them how to read the questions and interpret and provide the answer, have you considered or controlled for the type of work that they do, their role within the mill? Meaning, if they are the CEO, or if they are the wood procurement person, or if they are just the administrative assistant, that kind of thing?
So we have record of their position, but I haven't put it through any sort of analysis. But it is interesting to note. And most of the time when you're talking with the smaller mills, you're talking with the one person that wears all the
I
hats.
know.
Yeah, so it's much different. And that can also lead to a lot of non-response in our experience as well. You call the mill and I'm not the one to ask, you need to reach so-and-so or call this person or the other person. So it certainly does affect, but I haven't analyzed it as part of this study.
Cool. Great. Well, we're up to 2:30, so that concludes our session. Thank you again to all that attended, and thank you again to all the presenters. Great presentations, good information. If the audience, if you have questions that you think of later, please feel free to reach out to us. We're always happy to hear from our data users, and enjoy the rest of the symposium.